All right, we're back. Hi, everybody. It's Gray and Laura from Thinkful. We're here today to talk about freelancing, and we're here with some folks who have done a lot of freelancing work to talk about a few things kind of related to that, how to get it set up, what to do once you're actually doing the work. I should introduce myself.
Becoming your own boss 101.
Yeah.
Get excited.
Yeah. I'm Gray Thinkful. I do operations stuff over here. Laura is community.
Yeah, I'm responsible for the ferns. That's me.
And I'll pass it over to our folks today. So Brian, you're on my left. I'm going to start with you. Who are you and what are you doing here?
Okay, well, I'm Brian Schachter, and I'm here by way of, well, I guess first building websites was what it started as. And eventually, once the iPhone was released, it translated to the thing on the screen I can build that other people can use can now be in your pocket in the form of an iPhone. So that's kind of how I explain it in just really rough terms. So then fast forward through college, a full-time job at a big company for a year, 2 years of freelancing, other contracts, own personal projects, side endeavors, and another full-time job, and then also teaching at Thinkful. So that's my short and sweet.
Yeah, way cool. Cody, so tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, so I've been a developer freelancer now for, well, officially a year last month. I've been doing this, but I went full-time about 6 months ago now. I quit my job. I spent 10 years in retail management, selling everything from women's shoes to men's suits and everything like that, and decided I wanted to do a career change, and I really wanted to work from home. I have 3 kids and a wife, and I really wanted to spend more time with them and kind of not go along with society's thing of saying the man has to be out of the house. So I took a course at Thinkful to jumpstart myself into it, and after the front-end development course, I was actually able to land a pretty good freelancing gig, and from then it's just spiraled, and I've just kept getting gigs, and I'm here and making money and living, so doing what I want.
Yeah, awesome. Craig, say hi and tell us a little bit about what's going on with you.
Hi, I'm Craig. I have, as you said, Gray, I've worked in interactive development for nearly 20 years. I started off doing touch screens for a museum in Melbourne and went to doing children's games. I was working in London doing that, and then pretty quickly started freelancing for a number of years. Had a pretty steady company that I worked freelance for, and then I worked full-time for 6 years in Melbourne, and since then worked pretty full-time but freelance. And for the last year or so, I've really been focusing on reskilling because I was mainly working in ActionScript Flash, so I reskilled in doing iOS development, and thanks to Thinkful initially, and since then, yeah, I've just been delving into iOS development, working on my own projects at the moment. With an idea of building up a portfolio to then start working in iOS.
Yeah, very cool. And finally, John, who are you and what are you up to?
My name is John McCaffrey, and I'm a web developer. I started in Java and then moved into Rails. And actually, the way that I got started in freelancing was at a Rails conference. I went to my first Rails conference. I hadn't really expected on going to the conference. It was kind of expensive, but a buddy had bought a ticket and said he couldn't go. He gave me the ticket. I'm like, okay, great. And I had an amazing time at this conference. The Rails Ruby community is really great. And I actually met somebody there who was looking for some help on a side project. I already had a full-time gig, but they said, well, I just need somebody to build these reports. And I had just given a presentation on how to build stuff with PDFs, and I said, sure, I could totally do that. And that turned into a nice side project that I did for like 2 years. And along the way, I picked up a few more freelance projects like that, and have always enjoyed kind of doing that. And I've helped a few students. I've mentored with Thinkful as well as a few other mentoring groups. And I love trying to help people find a way to get into freelancing and side projects because it's less stressful than trying to get yourself hired for a full-time job. It's much easier to say, well, I could just do this one project for you on the side. It's a lot easier. I find it works pretty well, especially with the web development stuff where it's kind of collaborative by default. Rails development and many open source type things, it's very easy to build projects. So that's how I got into this.
Yeah, awesome. So I think everybody talked a little bit about how they got into freelancing, but Brian, let me ask you in more detail, like when you left the company you were working for full time, like why did you go, and how did you go about getting like into freelance work?
Yeah, so took myself off mute. Yeah, so I worked for about a year at Mutual Mobile, and they're a big company and a great company. I worked with a bunch of great people and was able to further my skills in iOS a lot while working there. So I definitely have these very positive outcomes from a full-time position as well as freelancing. Just to sum it up, everyone has different paths, and so I was kind of trying to figure mine out. And so not immediately after leaving, but within a few months after leaving, I contacted the Come Up, which is the biggest website for videos, and news, which is mostly videos nowadays, for BMX. I've been into BMX since I was a little kid, and didn't know anyone personally, but got in contact with them, and that was wasn't my first client. I tried out freelancing all through school. Like while I was going to school, I would freelance, and I think while I was still in high school, even I was like doing a little bit, just trying to get started, So it wasn't a success immediately, but the BMX app, the Come Up, was pretty huge, and that definitely showed me that, especially with iOS, talking about Craig mentioned reskilling, or I don't know a better term for it, but learning the modern skills. In school, I did a fair amount of ActionScript. And ActionScript 3 was what a lot of the cool interactive projects were built with. And that just was shifting. So I learned ActionScript, but figured out that if I could freelance and do something, it would probably be iOS and web. But yeah.
Yeah, very cool. So Craig, when you started with Thinkful, I think at that point you'd already been doing some freelance work. Is that right?
Yeah, a lot of freelance.
Or sorry, I totally misspoke. I meant Cody. Cody, when you started with Thinkful as a student, you'd already been doing some freelance work, I think, right?
Yeah, well, I started building websites when I was in like elementary school. In 4th grade, my class got like a computer with the internet in it ages ago, and that kind of started the whole thing. So I've been messing with websites forever. I remember when Dreamweaver by Mac was Macromedia, and it was just all the old school writing code in Notepad. So I had that going, and when I got into retail, I started doing that mainly because it worked. Like they kept promoting me, and I kept making more money, but it wasn't necessarily where my heart was. So as I continued to build my skills up, and I decided that this is really what I wanted to go towards, I had already a couple little clients that I just said yes to, even though I didn't really know what I was doing yet. And through Thinkful's course and just perseverance, I was able to actually deliver them websites that were good enough that they wanted to pay me.
Cool. Sounds cool.
So Greg,
do you remember? Oh, sorry. I was just chime in. Do you remember Adobe Go Live? I was just curious because I used that when I was like in middle school.
I do. That was like Go Live front page, and then there was like all the fun ones back in the day.
Yeah. Anyway.
Craig. So speaking of Adobe, Craig. So like, why did you decide to go freelancing? You've been doing this for a while. Like, when did you make that decision, and what did you do to get started?
I think it was. I mean, the initial decision to go freelancing was a long time ago. That was just circumstance. I went for a job, and that happened to be per project. But obviously, there's factors to consider. That freelancing can pay better. than a full-time position. And if you have the skills to be able to sell yourself as go into a job and regardless of the conditions, resolve the situation. If you have that confidence, then I think it can be more lucrative going the freelance route. So yeah, go on.
Yeah, John. So you mentioned that you like to kind of ask some of your students who are learning new technologies to take on small freelance gigs. Like, what do you recommend as a very first step for somebody interested in picking up freelance work for the first time?
Well, so this is mostly for the students that are already interested and motivated. I wouldn't necessarily suggest it to somebody who didn't already feel ready for it. But I find that a lot of the students that I'm working with have some level of expertise. They're often either in another career or switching careers. And there's usually a lot of work around what their domain knowledge is. They already know something about that field, and there are usually small projects that allow them to put together their domain knowledge plus the little bit of coding that they've learned and do simple things like building a website that integrates some data and shows it on a map, or parse some data, or build some simple store or something like that. And even though the projects are small, it's a huge boost to their confidence to know that they've learned something and they can now go code that and get paid for it. And I think it's a good stretch of your skills to go beyond just coding, but go to understanding requirements, fleshing out the requirements, thinking about what's the first phase of this functionality, what's the second phase, how will we support this, how will we deal with any bugs that come up, how will I invoice this customer, how will I deal with things. It makes you such a more well-rounded developer to have to go through all of that stuff. And also it makes you appreciate all the fact that you don't have to deal with most of that stuff on a lot of regular projects. Like I started my career first for just like one big firm, and I was very sheltered from the account management process or the sales process or anything. I was just handed requirements, and I would code them up, and I would complain about how crazy the requirements were, and these are so dumb, whatever. And I was very sheltered. And then fast forward a little bit, and I'm working at a consulting company, and I see all of the crazy things that really happen in real software development, where the requirements are completely insane, and there's no way we're going to make it. The budget's crazy. The attitudes, people are very emotional, and I just realized, like, oh wow, I was in such a nice, warm, cozy little bubble before that, and I just complained about the nature of the requirements, not realizing how much happens in order to make simple software process and requirements. But then after being at a consulting company where I was still slightly sheltered because I wasn't the salesperson, I wasn't the account manager, but then moving on in freelancing, then I did have to deal with all that. I would have to deal with people that seemed nice but were crazy. They had a great idea but they had no money, or they had a very, very boring, dumb idea but they had money, they paid on time, and they were really nice. And I got to see that full gamut. And then dealing with the budget, talking people down from their requirement into something simpler, like they had this grand vision, but that was going to eat up their whole budget. And sometimes they would ask me, but can you build this? And I would say, well, instead of me building it, why don't you just buy the software that already exists? That'll get you farther. You just have to learn. You learn so much more going through that whole process. And now when I go back to bigger companies, like an enterprise level company, I can tell that having gone through that experience gives me a little bit of an edge in how I deal with other people on the team that are not developers, how I put myself in their shoes, think about the sales component of this, think about the support, thinking about what it's like as a user. It's got me to think a little bit more about the full experience.
Yeah, I think John is.
Yeah, Brian, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I think John is right on point. And so there's a ton of factors. And I think I have the generally same take on it, that those kind of things, those requirements that are hard to achieve, and all those problems John mentioned, happen on a large scale and a very small scale. So to add to what John was saying about requirements, that's absolutely one of the first things I would suggest the person to think about. In addition to being able to do it, setting out the requirements and not undercharging. Because some of the first websites I ever did, like when I was still in high school, I only got a few $100s for them. And I thought that was fine, and I learned a ton. But if you keep doing that and you realize how many hours you're putting in, then that's not going to work for you as a freelancer. You're going to run out of money, or as John was saying, the client's going to run out of their budget. And so you have to balance these things and try to see what can we do with the budget we have, what's feasible, and let's not promise anything else. It's just bad for everyone to try to, promise the world with like a $2,000 budget. It's not possible.
Yeah. So those are some of the considerations once you start working. How do you guys go about actually attracting new clients, and what role do things like networking and your other portfolio work kind of play in that process?
I can say something there. Quick jump back to that point. I think that probably everybody that starts out freelancing probably underbids and undercharges their first couple of projects. And for the most part, that might be okay. I know one of my first projects, I thought the rate was a lot lower, but whatever. But then I also made a lot of mistakes in like customer management and just how I communicated things. Sometimes I would flake out and not get back to the guy for a couple days. And I realized, like, yeah, I was probably only worth that amount for my first couple of projects because I wasn't really giving the best level of service. Technically, I was doing fine, but as far as giving service and responding quickly and all of that, I wasn't doing that good of a job. So I kind of feel that's a nice thing about freelancing too, is that your rate can increase however you want. If you don't want to take on a project, and this is usually how my rate increases, I keep telling people I'm too busy, no, and then they say, well, we'll pay you more, and then I go, okay, fine, I guess. But you can do that, and it's okay to start out small. And when people go on Elance or Odesk or any of the sites, you start out with a very low rate, but you have to acknowledge your own greenness and your own newness to the world of being a service provider and all that. And it's okay to start out small. After a couple of months, your rates will be higher. So it's all right to start out with a low amount. But as far as how did I find people, for me, I was in a position to start doing some presentations at conferences and build up a little bit of expertise, and then people would seek me out for that specific thing, whether it be in Ruby, like some report generation stuff, PDF generation, or performance tuning. So then people would start to seek me out for that specific stuff, which is not always like that route doesn't work for everybody, but the going to conferences, going to user groups, and having an area where somebody looks at you and says, you look like you're good at that thing. I would like to talk to you about that area. Even if it's like a little bit narrowly focused, it's a starting point.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I think that the specialty factor, if you have something that's just anything that's a specialty. For me, one of the things, I went to school for music for a year and have been involved with music for many years. So that was one thing that it didn't even necessarily apply to the site, but I'm a musician, I need a website. Brian knows music, and Brian knows websites. And back to networking, that's half of it, I think, is meeting the people. First you have to meet the people somehow. Either they find you or you meet them, or they meet your friend. But in order to meet your friend, you have to have some friends to begin with, So or at least connections. So.
Yeah. Craig, I seem to recall looking at your portfolio of work at some point or another. How big of a role does your past work and your portfolio work have to do with attracting clients?
Sorry, I missed the question. How what?
Yeah, sorry. Just how big of a role does your portfolio work and your previous projects? How big of a role does that play in attracting new clients?
It's hard to tell without asking everyone I speak to what was the biggest factor in deciding to go with me. But I think it is a very big factor, personally, in having a great portfolio that showcases, your potential. And especially, it's been in my case, as I've had a lot of work in ActionScript. Obviously, the portfolio had to be in ActionScript and showing off some of the more advanced, things that you can do in ActionScript.
Well, and you're building portfolio work now with iOS stuff. At what point do you feel like that your portfolio will be in a good spot to start attracting clients there?
I would say potentially 3 projects would be, to have 3 apps on the App Store would be sufficient to begin looking for work. I've already had people contacting me about the potential of me working on some projects, but I'd really like to have a solid body of work behind me before I start.
Yeah,
Work.
yeah, that makes sense. I can definitely relate to that. And it's interesting. I agree that it's a pretty big part, your portfolio, in attracting new clients. Though it's interesting because depending on what you've recently been doing, I mean, the ActionScript dilemma was one thing. So I was in the same position. What I did in school that was in Flash, I didn't use it because that would make people think that I want to continue doing Flash.
Right.
And even with some client work, it depending on who your client is and if their app is ready to be released to the public. You might not be able to showcase a wonderful project that you did. For example, if you're working on something in the medical industry, I mean that's just a really big one that you built a medical industry app that's not released, and you can't talk about that yet, because it's not your app, and you can't show it to anybody. So it's funny. I found that
confidentiality contract as well.
Yeah, precisely. And I've found that sometimes makes it hard to explain to either someone interviewing you for a job or a potential client. Sometimes I feel like that's a weird downside to doing projects like that, is that it's hard to get them to just believe by telling them I worked on this project, because the stipulation is that I can't actually show you. You have to just take my word for it. And then when you have enough projects or enough any other work that you can show that people finally see, then they're like, okay, I get it. Even if he has one app, but he can tell us about the other apps that he can't show us, or he can't legally say that he built, which but it's just interesting.
So Cody, I have a question for you. What kind of criteria do you use when you're trying to decide what projects to take on next and which clients to work with?
Well, for me, I mean, I'm kind of devil's advocate. For me, networking hasn't really worked out for me. And my portfolio, I kind of started from scratch with it, so it wasn't super full, but most of my largest clients, I've actually sealed the deal without them ever seeing my work. They just met me, we talked, and we hammered it out. I don't know if that comes from that I spent so long in the sales field and stuff like that. Typically, the way I get my clients is I just go out to the location, I meet them, and I sell them, and then I go back and then build a website afterwards. One thing for me, though, at least the biggest thing I can say so far is being a new freelancer is that you have to know when to say no, because one bad client can take you.
Yep.
You can commit so much time and so much effort to a thing, and if they don't pay you or you don't have a solid contract in place or anything, you can really be in the hurt if you need to make rent or anything like that. So for me, it's been a client that is willing to accept that I'm the expert and will believe me to know that I'm telling them exactly what I think is the best way to do it, and that way they trust you instead of coming to you with just, like if they're really nitpicky and they really just keep getting on everything, they want to be involved in everything because they don't trust you to build it right, you got to say no, because they don't want you, they just want someone to build their idea. It's totally different than for me, where I design websites for them. And so I've had a few clients where I've had to say no to, and I gave them back their money and just said, sorry, this isn't going to work for both of us. There's better options or different stuff like that.
I think trust is like the biggest thing with freelancing on both sides, because from their point of view, the customer's point of view, they don't know. It's the same kind of feeling that many people get when they take their car in. They're not sure, am I going to,
Yep.
is this amount of money that I'm going to pay really the right amount? Maybe they talked to a few different people, but they probably know they didn't really talk to enough developers to get a good sense of what the rates really should be, or maybe you're low. They don't know. They have all this frustration and concern, and they're trying to trust you, and you're trying to trust them that they have the money and that the thing is going to get released and they're not going to get crazy and all of that. And it's really, really challenging. But I bet that your background probably did help you in landing those clients, because you're doing a little bit more sales. And I've been surprised that The number of clients that have come to me, I'm already like a little bit too busy, but I take the call just to see what it's about, and then I just say, well, some people have come to me and said, well, we want to do this whole thing in Rails, and I might say something like, you'll probably get cheaper developers in PHP, and I don't do PHP, but I bet you can find some overseas, and it'll probably work out great. So I wouldn't, don't even worry. Here's a way you can save money, or tell them other things that basically is effectively saying, I'm not going to try to do things that only make my life better. I will try to give you recommendations that might work better for you, as opposed to me saying like, I need to do all your work and I need to get paid all this money. And so many times people have said, okay, now we really want to work with you because you're the only person to have told us no, or the only person to tell us that we should go somewhere else if we have a smaller budget. And so that whole thing of establishing trust in whatever way you can, either it's usually by being very honest, is probably the best way to go.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, John. Honesty and I think transparency really is helpful. When I first started, well, not first started, but after I'd been doing things for a while, I realized sometimes like the worst bugs, the bugs that people really need you to fix, like it's terrible, can be fixed with one line of code. And I wondered, I was like, if the client knew that it was only one line of code, like, would they think that I'm like scamming them? But it's funny, like fast forward, not that long ago, I helped out a client, and they were trying to they knew a little bit of code, but not a ton. And this is sort of how teaching works too. But I fixed it for the client, and it was the same thing, like a few characters, like a line of code, fixed it. But it's not the typing time. It's all the time you spent learning all that stuff to know the right way to do it. And he watched me fix it with one line, and yet he was still just as much wanted to work with me, probably even more so, because he saw that I could fix something that is hard for other people. And last thing to add, I think fundamentally why people hire us to write code and things like that is because they don't understand it. If no one understands it, because if they did, then if they really understood it, then they would write the code themselves. So it's a dilemma of trying to get someone to trust you that you're doing something the right way, and it's something that it's an expertise that they don't know nearly as well as you do. So there's totally a level of trust.
Yeah.
About the criteria, sorry, it is interesting that I've discovered that when you say no to a project, you do discover in that moment how high a client will go with salary. Even if you don't want the project at all, they keep increasing the rate. Obviously, money is one factor.
So we're kind of running low on time here, but
okay.
Oh, sorry. It looks like hopefully our connection's okay. I just wanted to ask everybody if there was like one or two things that you wish you had known when you got into freelancing that we haven't talked about already.
Advice or tools or anything.
I have two real quick that I'll say. One is that when you're first getting started, find other freelancers. So pretend maybe you are going to pay somebody to do a project, and how would you find freelancers? You would search around, you would get a hold of them, and then once you have that list of people, turn around and ask them, do they have any sub-projects that you could work on, given your level of expertise? So if you're a web developer, hey, I won't charge you much. I'm trying to get started in freelancing, and I can fix these kinds of things. Because any freelancer that's kind of taken the effort to build up their brand and get stuff, they usually have more work than they can handle. So they often would definitely be able to hand something over to somebody else as a subcontractor. They'll charge their regular rate for the work, and they'll pay you less, and that's okay because you're getting established.
Yeah.
And then there's a really great website called The Freelancers Show, and we'll put it in the show notes and stuff. It used to be called Ruby Freelancers, but now it's called The Freelancers Show. And it's a podcast, and they talk all about the challenges of being a freelancer. A lot of it was more Ruby focused before, but so much of it is generic to any kind of freelancing at all, as far as accounting, taxes, contracts, subcontract, anything you could think of freelance related. These guys have covered it.
Cool. Craig, any last points that you wish you'd known going in?
We haven't really talked about recruitment agents at all, and I've just wanted to mention that I've found recruitment agents to be really really useful. They cover the administration and the looking for work, and it can feel like you're just working full time, but you go to a different company every other day, and so it takes out the less interesting parts of the job, and you can just work in your field.
Cool. Cool. Cody, how about you? Anything you wish you'd known, way back when, a year ago?
I'd say one of the biggest things, but the most obvious, is get a contract with everybody. It doesn't matter. Even if you feel like it's not enough money or anything involved, or you feel like you're going to be impolite by saying the contract, it just keeps it fair and simple for everybody. I've had times where it's taken 6 months to get paid on a project. And another thing for me was really just trusting myself. With Google, with so many things out there to learn how to do something, when a client asks you for something and you know it's possible but you don't know how to do it, just say yes and learn. And if you can't, there's always other freelancers that are willing to pick up the job. But for me, the big thing is just saying yes and moving forward. And that's gotten me more. Every job is scaled higher each time.
Cody, do you use a service like Billings Pro or something for your invoicing? I know, I'm sure a lot of
Yeah, I use FreshBooks.
Awesome.
I found that to be
FreshBooks too.
everything. That's what I use the most, and now it's great. I get paid. But the funny thing though is almost every client wants to pay by check and not online. I don't know why, but they always want to send me a check.
Cool. Brian, you get the last word, man. What do you wish you'd known going in?
Yeah, I think everything these guys said is great. Well, first things to get started, to follow what Cody said about getting a contract. If it's a small budget project, half up front and half at the end. So one of the first things, you want to get paid something, because you don't want your first project to you never get paid, or you get paid 6 months later. Yeah, and then I guess the last thing to add, what Craig said, I've had mixed experiences with recruiters. So a lot of the time it hasn't worked out and it feels like a waste of time. However, I had one of the, a really inspiring job, and it was only a few weeks, but at Harvard Magazine was thanks to a recruiter who just brought me in a few days later, and I met some really great people and got to see a place and work at a place that I never thought I'd end up at. So yeah, any way that you can do it, and if it's a client, just make sure you get some money to begin with, so you're not just they don't scam you.
Yeah, awesome.
But yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody. This has been really fun. We're kind of at our limit, so we'll let everybody go. But thanks for joining us, everybody here. Anybody out there watching, thanks for watching.
I'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Thank you so much. Bye, guys.